The restaurant lights were warm and golden that night, the kind that made everything look perfect, almost too perfect. The music was soft, the laughter around the table felt genuine, and Eric's arm was resting lightly on the back of my chair. To anyone watching, we looked like a couple deeply in love, celebrating a decade of happiness. I smiled when people looked our way, pretending I couldn't feel the storm that had been sitting quietly in my chest for weeks. Eric loved attention. He lived for it. The way he stood to make a toast, confident and charming, reminded me why everyone adored him. He said things like, 10 years, and I still can't believe how lucky I am to have this woman by my side. Everyone clapped, and I forced a smile, even as my stomach twisted. I had heard those same soft words from him once before. Only that time, they were whispered to someone else. Chloe sat across the table from me, laughing with her husband. Her eyes met mine for a second, and I saw the smallest flicker of guilt before she looked away. It was quick, but I caught it. She was wearing the same perfume Eric once said smelled like heaven. I remembered because it used to be mine, until she started using it. It was strange how betrayal could hide behind pretty smiles and wine glasses. When the waiter refilled my glass, I took a long sip to steady myself. My hands didn't shake anymore. They had when I first found out, the day I saw the messages between them. Back then, I cried until I couldn't breathe. But tonight wasn't about tears. Tonight was about silence breaking in the most unexpected way. Eric reached for my hand under the table, the way he always did when he wanted to look loving in front of others. His touch used to feel safe. Now it felt cold and practiced. "Ready for your speech, honey?" he asked with that same grin he used to charm the world. I nodded slowly, pushing my chair back. The room quieted as I stood. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, friends, family, co-workers, even Chloe. My heart beat fast, but not from fear. I looked around the table, at all the people who believed in the version of us Eric had built. Then I lifted my glass and said softly, "To loyalty, something not everyone here seems to understand." The words floated in the air for a moment before they sank in. Chloe's smile faded. Eric's expression shifted from pride to confusion. The silence that followed was heavy, sharp, and satisfying. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending anymore. I took another sip of wine, let it burn down my throat, and smiled. Not the fake one I'd worn for years, but one that came from quiet strength. The night wasn't about love anymore. It was about truth, and I was finally ready to let it speak. People always told us we were the perfect couple. They'd see our family photos on the mantle, me, Eric, and our 2 kids smiling in front of our house in Seattle, and say things like, "You two are goals." I used to smile and thank them, even though I knew they were only seeing the picture, not the truth behind it. Eric and I built a life that looked good from the outside. We had the nice house, the vacations, the parties, and the reputation of being the couple who had it all figured out. What they didn't see were the late nights when he wouldn't come home, or the mornings he barely said a word before leaving for work. I told myself he was just busy, stressed, trying to provide for us. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. It started with small things. Missed dinners, ignored messages, forgotten promises. He used to call me during his lunch breaks just to hear my voice. Then one day, he just stopped. When I'd ask about it, he'd shrug and say, "You're overthinking it." It became his favorite line. Anytime I tried to talk about how distant he'd become, he'd make me feel like I was the problem. The nights felt longer. I'd stay up waiting, staring at the empty spot beside me on the bed. Sometimes he'd come home late, smelling like cologne that wasn't his. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to ruin something we'd built for 10 years over a suspicion. But every time he turned away from me, every time he smiled at his phone, that quiet doubt grew louder. Our kids were young, too young to notice the shift, but I did everything I could to keep things normal for them. I packed lunches, attended school events, and made excuses for why their dad couldn't make it again. "Daddy's working hard for us," I'd say, even when I wasn't sure what he was really working on. In public, we were still perfect. At friends' gatherings, he'd keep his arm around me, laugh at my jokes, and play the loving husband everyone admired. But as soon as we got home, the silence between us was heavy. It wasn't anger. It was emptiness, the kind that eats away at love slowly, without noise or fights. I tried to hold on. I planned date nights, left little notes in his briefcase, cooked his favorite meals. But it didn't matter. He'd smile politely, thank me, and go back to his phone. I was fighting for something he'd already let go of. People said we were lucky. I used to think so too. But now I realized luck had nothing to do with it. What we had wasn't love anymore. It was a performance, one I'd been keeping alive long after he'd stopped caring about the script. The first sign came one quiet evening when Eric left his phone on the kitchen counter while taking a shower. His phone never used to buzz that late, but that night it did, twice. I wasn't snooping. I just glanced at the screen, and that one message changed everything. It said, "Can't wait to see you again, Red Heart." My stomach dropped. I remember standing there, frozen, staring at the words like they might change if I blinked hard enough. When he came out, I asked him calmly who it was. He didn't even flinch. He smiled that same smooth smile and said it was just a client, a joke between coworkers. I wanted to believe him so badly. I even forced a laugh, pretending it was nothing. But deep down, something shifted. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that my marriage wasn't just drifting, it was sinking. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing little things that didn't make sense. Eric began coming home later and later, saying he had meetings that ran long. Sometimes he'd shower as soon as he got home, avoiding eye contact. He used to smell faintly of his cologne, but now it was something softer, sweeter, a scent I didn't recognize. Once, I reached out to hug him, and he stiffened, as if my touch made him uncomfortable. That was when I started to understand something was really wrong. Then there was the hotel receipt. I found it tucked inside his jacket pocket when I was doing laundry, a one-night stay at a place downtown on a Tuesday. He claimed it was a last-minute business trip, but his company didn't usually send him anywhere local. I wanted to ask more, but I was scared of the answer. So I stayed quiet, hoping maybe I was just imagining it all. But it didn't stop there. Late-night calls started coming more often. He'd step outside to take them, speaking in a low tone, and when he came back, he always had an excuse ready. One night, he left his laptop open while getting the kids ready for bed. I don't know what pushed me to do it, but I checked his email. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through, and then I saw them, photos attached to an email thread. It was Eric and Chloe, my best friend. They were sitting in a restaurant I knew too well, the same one he took me to for my birthday last year. In one photo, he was holding her hand across the table, smiling. My throat went dry, and I remember feeling a strange calmness, the kind that only comes when pain is too heavy to feel all at once. That night, I didn't confront him. I went to bed beside him, pretending to sleep while my mind replayed those images over and over. The man I trusted most had betrayed me, and the woman I called my sister had been the one helping him do it. After finding those photos, something inside me changed. The tears didn't come anymore. I didn't scream, and I didn't confront him. I just went quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when your heart stops breaking and starts planning. I realized that if I wanted to end this, I couldn't do it with emotion. I had to do it smart. So I smiled when he came home late. I laughed at his stories, cooked his favorite meals, and pretended I believed every lie he told. He thought I was still the same woman who trusted him blindly, and I let him think that. It gave me time. He had no idea that behind every calm look, I was gathering the pieces of his betrayal one by one. The first thing I did was back up everything I had, the messages, the emails, the photos. I even forwarded some to a private folder only I could access. Then I started being careful, waiting for opportunities. He'd leave his phone around sometimes, thinking I'd never look again. That's how I got the recording. One night, while he was showering, I saw a new message from Chloe pop up. I opened it and started recording with my own phone. It wasn't long, just her voice saying softly, "Good night, baby. I miss you already." My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I saved it. It was proof, something undeniable. Over the next few days, I started collecting more. A dinner reservation at the same hotel from the receipt, another email confirming a weekend trip to a conference, which didn't exist. I even checked our bank statements and found charges from jewelry stores. One of them matched the necklace I'd seen Chloe wearing the last time she came over. The one I thought looked strangely familiar. Every discovery hurt, but each one made me stronger. I was no longer the woman begging for his attention. I was the woman preparing for her moment. I knew Eric's biggest weakness wasn't love. It was pride. He cared deeply about how people saw him, the successful husband, the devoted father, the man everyone admired. That was exactly where I'd hit him. I kept playing the role of the perfect wife, even showing affection in public. I wanted him comfortable, unguarded, sure that I was too naive to notice. He didn't see the difference in my eyes, the calm calculation behind my smile. He'd lean in to kiss me, and I'd let him, all while thinking of the night I'd exposed the truth. By the time our anniversary came around, I was ready. Every piece of evidence was saved, every detail in place. I didn't want revenge through shouting or chaos. I wanted him to face what he'd done in front of the same people he'd fooled for years. And when that night came, I promised myself I wouldn't cry. I'd simply raise my glass and let the truth speak for itself. When Eric brought up the idea of hosting a dinner for our anniversary, I almost laughed. He said he wanted to celebrate a decade of love, and that he'd invite our closest friends. I nodded, pretending to be touched, but inside I knew this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I didn't have to search for a chance to confront him. He was handing it to me himself. Fate had a strange sense of timing, and I wasn't going to waste it. He started planning everything with his usual excitement. He booked a fancy restaurant downtown, the the same one where he'd proposed to me years ago. He talked about the menu, the wine, the guest list. Every detail had to be perfect. And when he mentioned inviting Chloe and her husband, Mark, I felt my chest tighten for a second. Then I smiled and said, "That's a great idea." He didn't notice the edge in my voice. Over the next week, I played my part better than ever. I helped him finalize the invitations, picked out decorations, and even smiled while he rehearsed his speech. He thought it was just another night to show the world how perfect we were. But for me, it was the night I'd stop pretending. On the day of the dinner, I spent extra time getting ready. I put on the dress he once said made me look like the woman he fell in love with. It was soft blue, simple but elegant, and I paired it with the silver earrings he'd given me on our 5th anniversary before everything fell apart. I looked in the mirror for a long time, and for the first time in months, I saw strength staring back. When we arrived at the restaurant, everything looked beautiful: candles, flowers, music playing softly. Guests started arriving, greeting us with hugs and warm wishes. Everyone kept saying how amazing we looked together. I smiled politely, letting their words roll off me. Chloe and Mark walked in a little later, holding hands. She looked stunning, dressed like she had no guilt in the world. Eric greeted her warmly, maybe too warmly, but I stayed silent. My silence had power now. As dinner went on, I noticed how at ease Eric was. He laughed, told stories, charmed everyone just like he always did. No one could tell that beneath the surface, everything was about to fall apart. I watched him pour wine into my glass, his hand brushing mine like we were still that happy couple. But I wasn't the same woman he thought I was. Every smile that night was a mask. Every laugh was rehearsed. The people around us saw love, but I saw lies waiting to be exposed. The evidence I'd gathered was safe in my purse, ready when I needed it. By the time dessert was served, the air felt heavy, at least for me. Eric stood to make his toast, proud and unsuspecting. I sat there, calm and quiet, my hand resting on the stem of my glass. Justice had a way of being patient. Tonight, it was finally mine. Eric always loved being the center of attention, and that night was no different. As soon as the waiter poured the last round of wine, he tapped his glass and stood up with that confident smile everyone admired. The room quieted instantly. He began his speech, talking about how proud he was of our strong marriage and how grateful he felt for a loyal, loving wife who's been by my side through everything. Everyone clapped and laughed, and I felt every word cut a little deeper. He looked at me while saying it, his eyes soft, expecting me to melt like I always did. But I didn't. I held his gaze and smiled, not the sweet, shy smile he was used to, but one that carried something hidden, something he couldn't quite read. He kept talking, spinning stories about our love, our family, and our unbreakable bond. His voice was full of warmth, and if anyone else had been listening, they would have believed every word. But I heard the lies under the charm. Every compliment felt like an insult now, every toast like a cover-up for the truth he'd buried beneath his pride. When he finally finished, people raised their glasses, cheering. "To Eric and Emma," someone said. "To 10 years of love," another added. I lifted my glass too, clinking it gently against his. His smile widened, so sure of himself, so unaware of what was coming next. Then it was my turn. He handed me the floor with a little bow, like it was some kind of performance, expecting another sweet speech that would match his. I stood up slowly, my heart calm and steady. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, friends, co-workers, Chloe, and her husband Mark. I took a deep breath, lifted my glass, and said softly, "To loyalty, something not everyone at this table knows much about." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a second, no one reacted. Then I saw confusion ripple through the crowd. Eric's smile faltered. Chloe's hand tightened around her glass. Mark looked between us, trying to understand what was happening. The music in the background suddenly felt too loud, the air too still. I let the silence stretch. My voice didn't shake when I added, 10 years is a long time to share a life with someone. Long enough to learn what loyalty truly means, and what betrayal feels like. Eric shifted uncomfortably, trying to laugh it off, but no one joined him. The room was too quiet, every face now watching me instead of him. I met his eyes one last time and saw the first flicker of fear there, the realization that I wasn't playing along anymore. I took another small sip of wine, keeping my expression calm. The moment I had waited for had finally begun. The truth was no longer hidden behind closed doors. Tonight, I wasn't the woman he could fool. I was the woman who was about to expose him. The silence after my words was heavy, almost painful. No one moved, no one spoke. You could hear the clinking of a fork somewhere at the far end of the table, then even that stopped. Every face was turned toward me, waiting. Eric looked frozen in place, his confident expression gone. Chloe was staring at her glass, pretending she didn't understand what I meant. But I knew she did. I reached into my purse slowly and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, calmer than I thought they'd be. "Since we're celebrating loyalty," I said quietly, "let's make a toast to the truth." I scrolled for a moment, then pressed play. The sound that filled the room wasn't music or laughter. It was Chloe's voice, soft, teasing, saying, "Good night, baby. I miss you already." And then Eric's voice followed, low and intimate, whispering her name. Gasps spread across the table. Someone dropped their fork. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Chloe went pale, her lips parting like she might deny it, but the evidence was too clear. Mark turned toward her, his face full of disbelief and anger. "Chloe," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "What is this?" She didn't answer. She just looked down, tears filling her eyes. Eric reached across the table, trying to grab my arm, his voice breaking. "Emma, stop this. Please, we can talk about it later." I pulled my arm away, looking him straight in the eye. "Later? You've had months of later," I said. "This is now." Everyone in the room was staring at us. Some looked shocked, others just uncomfortable. The waiter stood frozen near the doorway, unsure what to do. Eric kept trying to speak, but every word died before it reached his lips. His face had lost all its color. I stood there for a second, letting the silence fill the space where his lies used to live. Then I lifted my glass and said, calm and clear, "You thought I'd cry, Eric. You thought I'd break down and beg for answers. But tonight, I'm just raising a glass to your honesty or what's left of it." A few people looked away. Chloe was quietly crying now, and Mark pushed his chair back, standing up. He didn't say another word before walking out. The rest of the table sat frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave. Eric ran a hand through his hair, trying to find words that wouldn't come. "Emma, you're humiliating yourself," he muttered. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "No, Eric," I said. "I'm freeing myself." Then I placed my glass back on the table and looked at him one last time. The man who once stood so tall now looked small, trapped under the weight of his own choices. The truth was out. There was no taking it back, no charm to hide behind. The lies were done, and I finally felt light. For a few seconds after the recording ended, no one seemed to breathe. The air felt thick, the silence too loud. Then everything happened at once. Chairs scraped the floor, glasses clinked, and Chloe suddenly stood up, tears streaming down her face. She covered her mouth, mumbled something no one could hear, and ran toward the exit. Mark's eyes followed her, cold and full of rage. Then, without warning, he grabbed his glass of wine and threw it straight at Eric. The red splashed across Eric's shirt like spilled guilt. Mark didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out, his footsteps hard and fast. The rest of the table was frozen. Some people whispered, others just stared down at their plates, pretending they weren't witnessing a marriage fall apart. No one knew what to say. Eric tried to speak, stammering, "It's not what it sounds like," but no one looked convinced. His voice, once so confident, cracked halfway through his excuse. I stood still, letting him squirm under the weight of the truth. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. "Emma, please, we can fix this," he said, desperation creeping into his tone. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. Not love, not anger, just emptiness. "There's nothing left to fix," I said quietly. "You broke it long before tonight." He opened his mouth again, but I was done listening. I picked up my glass and took one last slow sip of wine, letting the taste linger. Then I slid my wedding ring off my finger. The sound it made when I placed it on the table was small but sharp, a clean ending. I looked around at the faces that had once smiled at us, the same faces that now saw the truth for the first time. "You can keep pretending, Eric," I said softly, "but I'm done playing your part." He just sat there, staring at me, his face pale, his hands shaking. He didn't try to stop me when I turned to leave. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step louder than his excuses, louder than the whispers behind me. As I walked past the waiter near the door, I gave him a faint smile, the kind that said I was okay, even if I wasn't yet. The cold night air outside hit my face, but it felt refreshing, like a first breath after being underwater for too long. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled chaos. Eric trying to explain, people murmuring, glasses clattering. But I didn't look back. I had spent years holding everything together, protecting his image, hiding the cracks. Not anymore. That night, I left behind not just a husband, but the version of myself that accepted less than I deserved. As the door closed behind me, I felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy, it was peaceful. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight slipping through the curtains, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of pretending. My phone was buzzing nonstop on the nightstand, calls, messages, voicemails, all from Eric. I didn't answer a single one. His voice filled the voicemail box, each message sounding more desperate than the last. First, he was calm, asking to talk. Then he started apologizing, promising to change, to fix things. By the fifth message, he was begging. But I was done listening. The night before had taken everything heavy inside me and burned it to ashes. There was nothing left to save. So instead of crying or replaying his words, I got dressed, tied my hair back, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. I walked in with steady steps and said the words I'd been holding in for too long. I want to file for divorce. Filing the papers felt strangely peaceful. No drama, no shouting, just finality. The lawyer looked at me kindly, like he could see that this wasn't anger driving me. It was relief. When I walked out of that office, the air felt colder but cleaner, like I could finally breathe again. Eric tried reaching out through mutual friends. Some of them called me, saying he was a broken man, that he regretted everything. I didn't doubt that he was sorry, but sorry didn't erase betrayal. Sorry didn't undo years of lies. I told them all the same thing. He made his choices. I'm just making mine. Within days, word spread around town. Seattle wasn't small, but our circle was, and people talked. The man who had always walked into every event with his head high now couldn't face anyone. Everyone knew what happened at that dinner. They knew who he really was behind the polished charm. His co-workers stopped inviting him to lunches. Friends distanced themselves quietly. The reputation he'd built for years crumbled faster than I expected. As for Chloe, she didn't last long in town after that night. Mark packed his things and left her within a week. She tried reaching out once, a message that simply said, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. She lost her marriage, her friends, and her comfort. But I didn't smile about it. I didn't celebrate. I just moved on. I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need to ruin them. The truth had already done it better than I ever could. All I wanted now was peace. I went back to focusing on my kids, on rebuilding a life that wasn't centered around someone else's lies. That quiet morning, sipping coffee at my kitchen table, I looked out the window and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, calm. Not joy, not excitement, just calm. And sometimes that's all victory really is. Now, when I look back at everything that happened, it feels like watching someone else's story. Someone who once believed that love could survive anything, even lies. But that night changed something deep inside me. It wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the moment I finally saw my own worth. Eric thought that humiliating me would break me, that I would fall apart and beg him to stay. Instead, I found a strength I never knew I had. For years, I had been quiet, patient, and forgiving. I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant enduring things in silence. But that night showed me how wrong I was. Love shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't make you question your own value. When I stood up at that table and spoke the truth, I wasn't doing it to get even. I was doing it to free myself. People often think revenge means shouting, breaking things, or watching someone suffer. But real revenge is calm. It's walking away with your dignity while they're left standing in the mess they created. That's what I learned. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I simply raised my glass, told the truth, and left. And that moment of quiet confidence was worth more than any argument or apology ever could be. After the divorce, there were hard days. Nights when the silence felt heavy. Mornings when I missed the routine of what used to be. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself that peace is better than pretending. I had been living in a house built on lies, and walking away was the only way to rebuild something real. I started focusing on small things. My kids' laughter, morning walks, coffee with friends who truly cared. Slowly, life began to feel lighter. There was no need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I realized I didn't lose a husband that night. I lost a man who never truly valued me. And in that loss, I found myself again. Eric's downfall wasn't my victory. My strength was. I didn't need to ruin him because he had already done that to himself. All I needed to do was rise quietly and completely. I learned that grace can be louder than rage, and silence can be more powerful than revenge. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a broken woman. I see someone who survived betrayal with dignity. Someone who learned to let go without hate. Someone who turned pain into power. That night at the restaurant wasn't about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming myself. When I raised that glass, I wasn't celebrating revenge. I was honoring the part of me that refused to be small, the part that chose peace over pride. He thought he destroyed me, but in truth, he freed me. And that's something I'll always be grateful for. Not for what he did, but for who I became because of it.